Okay guys, welcome back to Module 8. This is the Rogers section, so attributes of innovation and their rate of adoption. So obviously the Rogers text, as I've mentioned before, is a classic text. It's been around forever, and you just kind of see these universal philosophies, just kind of going through regardless of the timing when you're talking about diffusion of innovation. So we did review this, but this is the main portion of the text where we review the different attributes of innovation and their level of importance. So relative advantage is really held up in the text as being probably the most important aspect of a diffusion of innovation. You've got to have a better way of doing it, a better mousetrap, whatever it is. So that's the most important thing. Compatibility is, we've talked about this in previous lectures, the degree to which an innovation is perceived as being consistent with the existing values, past experiences, and the needs of the potential adopters. What the book stresses, in this section is that what we're really thinking about are the needs of the potential adopters. So past experiences and everything, when you're talking about an innovation that's more routine versus disruptive, then sure, past experience will help. If I have to type the same way or the same, click motions, or the blender works the same as the old one, all those things, help us with compatibility. But when you're talking about a disruptive innovation, you're not going to have that. And really what we're looking for is the compatibility with the needs of the potential adopters. Complexity, the degree to which an innovation is perceived as difficult to understand and to use. Complexity has like two aspects to it that you see in the reading. One, is it hard for me to understand how to do this myself? Am I going to reject it from the beginning? But two, do I understand the directions? Am I going to apply the innovation properly? Or, as the book said, there were several examples where farmers were using old techniques for new products that had nothing to do with the old techniques. One of the examples was fertilizer was being applied the same way that manure was applied. So if you know anything about gardening, fertilizer has very low levels of nutrient. And manure particularly, that's what they were talking about. Very low levels, so it's really for conditioning the soil, where fertilizer is about feeding the plant. And those levels are significantly higher, sometimes 10 times the level that manure would be. And so obviously when you're applying it to a plant the same way, you're definitely causing problems for the plant, and you're getting less effectiveness. So that complexity had two levels to it, which we don't necessarily discuss earlier in Rogers, but here we get a little more clarity as to what complexity is all about. And then trialability, again, the degree of which an innovation can be experimented with on a limited basis. So I think they mentioned that there were some, what was it, that were given out ahead of time that they could try things out on a limited basis, and then you could purchase if you really wanted it. The fact that cell phones were available, you could borrow your buddy's cell phone. There was maybe a cell phone in a rental car or something like that, and that helped with the proliferation. And then observability, the degree to which the results of an innovation are visible to others. And this was one of those things where, like, observability might not be something that you can even pay attention to, because it might not be something that's instant. So you can see somebody with a cell phone in their hands, but do you remember what happened, in the beginning of like a fertilizer application or a pesticide application, to see the impact of it later on? So a lot of that observability was a bit subjective, only because not every innovation is immediately visible. Attributes of innovation in the case study. So this was kind of nice because we sort of go through and we look at each one, each of the case studies, and how they contribute somehow to relative advantage. I, for one, cannot tell you why rap music is relative advantage. It's not one of my favorites, but my children will tell you that it's fabulous and they love it. obviously things like the Palm Pilot, all of those integrated features, the harvest store silos. If you ever notice, if you're driving, through kind of a farmland or rural area, you will notice those giant harvest store silos, and the fact that there are often two of them, great big huge navy blue, bright, you can see that in the farm. And when I found out in the reading, I didn't know that they were so much more expensive than the one that would have been recommended by the extension person. And I thought, my gosh, these are status symbols. Wow. But you do notice them. That was definitely a diffusion of an innovation. So, and the China one child, you notice in the reading that there is social pressure associated with this. So that is a cultural impact. That is the rally the herd. So I tried to highlight on this slide where switch and diffusion sort of come together, right? So rally the herd is an easy way for us to remember, but the social pressure associated with the China one child is an impact of that. So the success of that project had to do with the fact that neighbors and coworkers were putting pressure on married couples to only have one child. So there were certainly punishments of some sort where I think once you get to, I think it was the third child, your hospital wasn't paid for and things like that, and that the apartments were very small. So it was a punishment. If you had that many children, you're going to be really squished. But really, the rally the herd, the impact that was most pronounced was when you had that group pressure, putting pressure on their neighbors to have less children. And then system incentives was also an example of rally the herd. That was in, I think, was it the Philippines, where they actually gave an incentive to a village or a community once everybody was using family planning. So again, you get that rally the herd pressure to participate in an innovation that maybe either you didn't understand or you didn't think was valuable to you as an individual. So you go from that, optional diffusion to either collective, meaning, okay, did we all decide as a community we're going to use this family planning, or authority, where that village really produces that authority to persuade people to participate in family planning. So again, those are two rally the herd examples. Compatibility, so India's eating habits, the different types of rice. I thought that was a really good example because that one is used often, where it was a phenomenal innovation for improving hunger. You got a significant improvement in the production of rice, and the whole idea was to contribute to the hunger problem in these developing nations. But the problem was that nobody liked the color, or nobody liked the taste of the rice. There's another example where the rice is actually a golden color, and people didn't like that either. So there are issues associated with compatibility that may prevent the diffusion because people just out and out reject it. I thought the example of the Punjab tractor blankets was hilarious because the guy used to sell blankets that they covered their, I would assume they were like the cows that pull the plow. And they would cover them with the blankets, and then they decided, well, this is what's doing my planting now, and so, I'll cover the hood of the truck with the blanket. So these habits that we get used to and we associate with a particular function, more so than, the animal, is actually the function that the tractor is providing. We have these habits that we think are important. And it's important for change agents to understand the impact of those habits. Otherwise, you're going to run into a problem where you have issues associated with diffusion. So they do make a very impactful plea that change agents pay close attention to existing habits and culture. So the empty vessel fallacy, that there are no habits, no pre-existing conditions, no history or perceptions, is foolish, and change agents absolutely need to make use of those pre-existing things. So one of the bright spots, which would be consistent with switch, was the Philippines, where the change agent discovered that when chickens eat the iping seeds, they become infertile. And so he was able to use something that that the rural people understood. They understood about these seeds and that the chickens would no longer lay the eggs. And so they understood this would be a good association. So people understood what the contraception did. And I thought that was brilliant. So that would be considered, you know, from a switch perspective, a bright spot. How can we use what is existing? That creates that compatibility so people understand and they're comfortable with the new innovation. And then there is a way to counter history and perception. So as I mentioned earlier, I spent my entire career in technology, and pretty much everything I did was about, you know, diffusing innovation, whether it was something that was, you know, more leading edge or even, you know, routine innovations. Everything requires an innovation strategy. And some of the things that we were taught were to understand what the goals and objectives are of the person that you're talking to, because this is the point where the book mentions that you have to have a trusted relationship with the person that you're trying to convince. And the way to do that is to develop a rapport by understanding what their goals are. So whether the goals are at a high level, you know, a CEO or a vice president or something like that, or even at a department head where this is the person that you're talking to, what are their goals? What are the objectives associated with that goal? So that time frame to implement that goal. What strategies do they have? And associated with those strategies, what are the needs that have to be addressed in order for those strategies, objectives, and goals to go forward? So you tie those things together, pointing to the destination, which is, of course, the goal. And you help the people understand how your innovation is going to move their goals and their strategies forward. That's really the best way to get people to understand the relative advantage of your innovation. And then as you're going through needs, you know, it's to help them understand, you know, from a compatibility perspective, what are you doing now? How is it working? So if you're there as a change agent of some sort, clearly there's a problem with what's working now. So you open up the discussion to help them understand how they can do things differently. We're going to take a quick break and come back for part 2 of this section.